Knowing what something cannot do is how you learn what it's for. We're going to cover the 4 limitations of what things like ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude can do so that you can actually get the most out of these models. After we cover these 4 limitations, we're also going to look at a story about a company that lost $100 billion in market share from one of these limitations and what you can do to avoid them. Let's start with limitation 1. Limitation 1 is knowledge cutoff dates. This one is simple to understand. Just imagine an encyclopedia that was printed in August of 2025. This means that the encyclopedia would have information on events all the way up until that specific cutoff point. If you tried to look in the encyclopedia for any information on an event that happened in September 2025, it would not have it. The same concept applies for these AI models like ChatGPT, Gemini, and Claude. You cannot ask it information on something that it does not have training on. Now, there are some caveats to this specific limitation. Those exceptions are what we call thinking and research. If you try to use ChatGPT today, it has options that ask if you want it to do research mode or if you want to use one of the more advanced models like thinking. This just means that even if the AI model like ChatGPT does not have data on events that happened in September 2025, it's actually able to do research to fill in the gaps of the information that it has. But there are some trade-offs. If you use these functionalities like thinking and research, the models take longer to give you an answer. So when you trade speed, you get more accurate answers for information that it might not have been trained on. Let's look at limitation number 2. Limitation 2 is the most important of the 4 that we're going to cover today, and we're going to look at real-life examples of models encountering these limitations. This limitation actually has 2 subgroups, and I've lumped them together. We have the risk of a model giving you incorrect information and the risk of a model hallucinating information. The reason I've lumped them together is because the end result of both of these come to the same place, which is giving you the wrong answer. But the difference between these two is that how the model arrives at that wrong answer is key. When a model gives you incorrect information, that comes from bad training data, but when a model hallucinates information, that comes from statistical patterns. And I know statistical patterns is a really fancy phrase, but don't let it intimidate you because we're gonna cover what that means and how hallucinations actually happen. But first, let's start with a real-life example of incorrect information and what happened. This first real-life example comes from Google, and it was when they were doing a live demonstration of their AI chatbot called Bard. Nowadays, we know it as Gemini, but back in the day, Google used to call their AI agent or chatbots Bard. During that live demonstration, someone from Google asked it, "What new discoveries from the James Webb Space Telescope can I tell my 9-year-old?" Well, let's take a look at what Bard replied with. Bard said, "The James Webb Space Telescope took the first picture of a planet outside the solar system." Well, that sounds plausible, right? Wrong. It was actually the European Southern Observatory that took the first picture of a planet outside our solar system way back in 2004. But is this even a big deal? Yes, because look what happened. Reuters reported the mistake that Bard made, and Google lost $100 billion in market share in a single day. $100 billion in a single day. All of this came from the fact that Bard was asked a question and it provided a wrong answer. The reason that we classify this as incorrect information and not a hallucination is because there is a right answer, which is it was actually the European Southern Observatory, but Bard got it wrong. That nuance is why hallucinations and incorrect information is different, because hallucinations don't even have an answer at all. So let's take a look at a real life example of that. This example comes straight out of 2023, and it has to do with legal research. A lawyer was preparing for a case, and for that case, he had to submit a legal brief. For that brief, he had to do a lot of research on past court cases that were similar to his. Well, we can just use ChatGPT, right? So he asked ChatGPT, can you provide me 6 cases that are similar to the one that I'm working on? After spending some time thinking and researching, Chat gave him 6 incredible cases that were directly relevant to the one that he was working on. But this lawyer is smart. He's not just going to take something ChatGPT gives him and not verify it, right? He asked it, Chat, are these cases real? Can you please confirm? ChatGPT replied and said, yes, these cases are real and exist in legal history. At that moment, it was go time for the lawyer. He submitted the case, and after it was reviewed by the court and judge, guess what happened? The case was completely made up. And I don't just mean 1, 2, or 3. All 6 cases were completely fabricated out of thin air. And I really want to emphasize to you what this means. ChatGPT completely fabricated or made up judge names, witness names, fake quotes from those judges and witnesses, the entire case from end to end. Now, imagine the embarrassment and ridicule that that lawyer had to face because he did not do his due diligence in making sure that ChatGPT was not hallucinating. Understanding these limitations have real-world impact on using them and the work that you're doing. Now, you might be wondering, how do these hallucinations even happen? Well, in the case of incorrect information, that was pretty easy to understand, right? An agent or chatbot is trained with a specific set of information, and something within that information was wrong, so then it gave you a wrong answer. But hallucinations are completely different because that information doesn't exist anywhere. So how did the chatbot come up with it? Let's look at an easy example to explain for you to understand. To do that, we have all encountered autofill. Whether we are writing a text or an email, nowadays phones, computers will try and fill in what you're trying to say. So let's do an exercise. Hope you have a great, what do you think goes into this blank? Well, obviously, 9 times out of 10, you're gonna say day, right? Because this is the most common thing to fill in this blank. But here's the thing. These agents like ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini all work from statistical patterns. So it will always fill in the data that it thinks is most statistically likely. But what happened in the case with the lawyer is this. When that lawyer tried to use ChatGPT to find 6 cases that were relevant to the one that they were working on, what ChatGPT did was, okay, it said, I have all of these legal cases in my training data, and let me find ones that are statistically similar to the ones that this person is asking for. So what happened with that lawyer is that ChatGPT actually looked at real legal cases that it had in its training data, and from that, it created specific Now, when that lawyer used ChatGPT, here's what happened. ChatGPT has access and was trained on real legal cases. So when that lawyer asked for 6 cases that were relevant to his, ChatGPT was desperate to give it an answer. And when I say desperate, I'll tell you what I mean in a second. ChatGPT then created statistically similar cases or texts that it thinks fits what that person was looking for, even though it wasn't real. When I say it was desperate, what I mean is that these chatbots like ChatGPT, Gemini, or Claude are trained to try and give you quote unquote correct answers to satisfy what you're looking for, rather than tell you it's not confident or doesn't have access to what you're asking. That's why whenever you're using these models, you'll never see them say, actually, you know what? I don't know anything about that. So that's what happened with this lawyer. ChatGPT looked at his request and was like, okay, how can I autofill what is statistically most likely to give that person a response that actually satisfies what they are looking for? Hence, that's why it created the hallucination of 6 legal cases. How crazy is that? Now let's look into limitation 3. Limitation 3, context window, means that these models like ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini have a maximum amount of information that it can consider when it's giving you an answer. Let's look at an example. Imagine you're having a 60-minute conversation with ChatGPT. Well, because it can only consider so much information, it's not able to consider all of the conversation that you had with it during this entire hour. So how ChatGPT prioritizes the information that it does have is what's called a first in, first out basis. What that means is that in its responses to you, maybe it'll prioritize the information that it had in the beginning of your conversation, and then it'll prioritize the information that it had towards the end of your conversation, but it might put lower priority on what's called the messy middle. It puts lower priority here because of the maximum amount of information that it can actually consider when giving you responses. So this just means that sometimes you'll have to give it context more than once, or you'll have to repeat what you've already said. But as these models get stronger and stronger, it'll improve its ability to maintain more context in all of its responses to you. But for now, you just have to make sure that you remember, if you upload a 500-page book and ask ChatGPT and have a conversation regarding that book, it might not be able to consider all 500 pages in its responses to you. So always make sure that when you're talking with ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, it has the right context to give you the best answer possible. Now let's look at limitation number 4. Limitation 4 is that these models are non-deterministic. What this means is that when you ask it one question, it can give you multiple different answers depending on. Limitation 4 means that these models like ChatGPT, Claude, and Gemini are non-deterministic. What that means is that if you ask it the same question multiple times, it can give you different answers each time. But why is this relevant or even important? Let's look at an example. Imagine I ask ChatGPT to write me a bedtime story about space pirates. If I asked ChatGPT that same question 100 times, if it was deterministic, then it would give me story number 1 100 different times. But because ChatGPT is non-deterministic, this adds variation to the answers to the same questions. So now when I ask it, write me a bedtime story about space pirates, well, maybe one time it'll give me story number 1, another time it'll give me story number 2, or another time it'll give me story number 3. These models are made in this way because it makes the chatbots way more interesting to use. Can you imagine getting the same answer to this prompt 100 times? It would be so boring. It's like you're talking to a robot. But because it's non-deterministic, there's flavor, there's differences to its responses. And that's why you're literally seeing people fall in love with their ChatGPT, because it feels so real. Please don't fall in love with your ChatGPT. Now, we've reviewed these limitations of these AI models, and you're probably asking, okay, Timothy, I understand these limitations, but what can I even do about them? That's the last part of what we're gonna look at. So let's see. Well, what can we do? To answer that question, I'll ask you a question. How many rocks should I eat for a healthy diet? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 3? Well, obviously, the answer is 0. But let's look at this interesting case where someone actually asked AI that specific question, and let's see the answer that it gave them. And I'll pop that up on the screen right here. How many rocks shall I eat? Well, here's the AI overview. According to geologists at UC Berkeley, you should eat at least 1 small rock per day. But you're probably saying, Timothy, that's so obvious. Even if I saw that response from an AI bot I was using, I would know I'm not gonna eat rocks. But that's where this gets really interesting. The reason you know not to eat rocks is because you have context over what a healthy diet looks like. But what about the instances where you don't have context? Let's look at the example of the lawyer. He did not know specific cases that were relevant to the legal brief he was working on. So because his context level was 0, it's easier for him to get fooled by the response of a specific LLM or AI chatbot. So my recommendation for all of you is trust should always be preceded by verification, especially in examples where you have no context. An easy way to remember this is the lower amount of context I have about what I'm asking, the higher chance there is that I will be fooled by an answer that ChatGPT gives. That's exactly what happened to the lawyer. He had no context over what legal cases he was asking ChatGPT to research for him, and because of that, he just took those court cases as if they were real. Guys, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude is not God, okay? So please, please, please always verify and then trust. These tools are amazing, and I can't wait to see where the world goes with them. But if you don't understand these limitations, then you run the risk of really getting bad results. So I promise you that if you verify before you trust any information that these chatbots give you, then you will be in a much better place to use these models than anyone else. Please do not end up like that lawyer, because for me personally, I can't imagine having been in that situation and the embarrassment I would have felt. Thank you for watching.